One of my angling heroes, Rob Malin, once said to me, the most important aspect of any rig is, can the fish get the bait in its mouth? Now, it might sound simple, but if you cast into some weed, the hook gets snarled up and the fish is sucking and sucking at the bait and it can't get it in its mouth, you're not going to catch it. So let's have a look at 4 rigs that sit perfectly on top of the weed. The first of these is the classic pop-up rig. So let's talk you through the components of that one and how to tie it. First of all, we've got a wide gape X hook on. Very, very important. A much thicker wire hook than the standard wide gape. Still very, very sharp. A curved in point which stays in better, but it's very weedy out there and I'm going to have to pull very hard to keep the fish out of it. So you want a nice thick hook pattern, and being sort of a medium to short shank hook, it makes it very strong as well. So that's what I'd recommend. I've tied that to the hybrid soft material, and soft is the key word here. I don't like stiff hook links when you're fishing in heavy weed. It can sit really funny in the weed. You want a softer hook link like this to settle down into the fronds of weed, so when the fish comes in, that pop-up looks as natural as possible, as close to a free offering as you can possibly get. So I've stripped the coating off of the green hybrid soft, obviously to blend in with the green weed, and then I've tied the hook on with a whipping type knot. You could use a knotless knot if you wanted to. Very, very easy to do. Just make a big loop underneath the hook, wrap around the hook once going up the hook, and then carry on wrapping round the hook, sort of whipping down towards the eye. Once you've done 5 or 6 turns, you can use the tiny tag in to tighten the knot, and it's done. And then after that, I've slid on a bit of shrink tube. This is the 1.6mm clay version. Just looks nice sitting up in the water there, helps disguise the hook. And then next on goes a small size rig ring. Just slide that onto the hook, tie it in a simple overhand knot, and that will just lock the hair in place. And it's very important that that rig ring is about halfway down the hook, so it sits over like that. If you have it too far up the hook towards the bend, what can happen is it can twist round and end up sitting the other way, so it can go in the fish's mouth backwards. It will still turn, but I like it to go in forwards so the hook is pointing towards the flesh straight away. And then moving down from that, you see there are 3 lumps on the hook link. The first one is a bit of rig putty, and what I've actually done, I've slid the smallest of the hook link sinkers down onto the hook link first, and then later on I've covered that in rig putty, and that is my counterbalance. That's what it's going to literally sit that far off the bottom. And then moving down the hook link, I've got 2 of the larger sinkers on there, and the reason I've used the larger ones, this hybrid soft is a little bit stiffer than braid, and you need a heavier hook link weight to actually sink it down properly. Very, very important that, to keep everything sunk down into the weed so nothing's looping up that the fish can get involved with. And then moving down, you see I've got quite a long hook link on there. That's probably 12 to 14 inches long. And on the other end, I've just tied on a link loop rather than tying a loop. This hybrid soft material doesn't like loop knots, so don't tie them in it. Always tie something to a link loop instead. And there I've just tied a 5-turn half blood knot. Very, very simple to tie, just through the eye of the link loop, around and around the hook link. The first knot you tied when you probably started going fishing, pull it up tight, and then pull the tag in tight so that all the knot is the same size and all nice and straight. Very, very strong. So that's the one I would use most times. The hook's going to sit up nicely in the weed. If you imagine all them baits drifting down into the weed, that hook bait's just going to look like another one. And another version of that similar kind of pop-up presentation is incorporating the supernatural braided hook link. This is the £25 version. I don't see any point using the £18 in such weedy conditions. The hook's tied on exactly the same way. I haven't used the rig ring, which to be honest is not for blowback or anything else. I normally use the rig ring just so that the hair kicks off the hook at a more acute angle, so the bait and the hook are separate. I think that's really important, that the two are not too close together, especially with the hair leaving the hook at that point. I think it can stop the hook from turning in the fish's mouth. So because we've got softer material here, it does tend to kick away a little bit easier than the inner braid that we've got on the hybrid, so I haven't used the rig ring in this situation. Got a small sinker on there with a bit of putty over the top of it as our counterbalance, and all of these pop-up rigs will sink very, very slowly into the weed, so it's worth spending some time in the edge just trimming that bit of putty down so it only just sinks very slowly, and then you know that hook is proud. And moving further down the hook link, you can see I've got 2 of the smallest hook link sinker weights on there. It's a very soft material, it sinks reasonably well anyway, so you don't need a lot of extra weight to drop it down into the weed. Same sort of length, sort of 10 to 14 inches. Better to err on the side of caution if you're fishing on top of weed, because like I said before, if they can't get that bait in their mouth, you're not going to catch them. And then at the very end, I've got one of our link loops that I've just tied a grinner knot onto. Again, very important not to use loop knots even in braid, because it does reduce the breaking strain. So that's pop-ups. They're my first choice if it's really weedy on the bottom, but if the weed's a bit more sparse and you think the fish are a bit cuter and you want to fish a hook bait hard on the bottom, then my first choice would be the old Faithful Snowman Rig. This has caught thousands of carp absolutely everywhere. Called a snowman because we've got a double hook bait that looks a little bit like a snowman there. We've got a pop-up on the top and then a bottom bait underneath. And just to talk you through how to tie that one, I'm using the hybrid soft material again, just because I've got so much confidence fishing it in the weed. The colour's perfect and it settles down into the weed really well. So I've stripped some of the coating back, tied a size 6 Y-gape X on with my favourite whipping knot, and then put a bit of shrink tube on the eye of the hook, and when I've shrunk it down, I've curved it inwards to help that hook flip over and catch hold. I'm also using a rig ring on the hook, but you see there, it's further down the hook, closer to the bend of the hook, because the weight of the bait is then transferred onto the point of the hook. With a pop-up, the bait's weightless, so you want it a bit further down. With effectively a slow sinking bottom bait, I think you want it closer to the bend of the hook. And talking about the baits, you can see the one closest to the hook is not sliding down the hair, and that's because the loop I've tied for the hair is much bigger, so the knot of the loop has ended up inside that bottom bait, the one that's closest to the hook. Very, very important. If that slides down next to the hook, I think it can stop the hook from turning and catching hold. And then moving down the hook link, you can see there's probably a centimetre of the exposed braid to help that hook lift up and catch hold in the fish's mouth. And then we've got the coated section, which is good for anti-tangle, and that's probably 10 to 12 inches long, something like that. Got a couple of the sinker weights on it, and then at the end it's just tied on with a half blood knot, very, very simple, onto a link loop. And that's going to sit, if I can put my hand there, that's going to sit basically like that on the bottom. So the bottom bait is going to be touching the bottom, the pop-up's sitting above it, hence the snowman name, and the hook will be sitting flat on the bottom. So if there's not too much weed, that'll go in the fish's mouth really easily, and there's no real difference between that and all the free offerings that you're putting out. So that's one option. And then the second one is tied slightly differently. Here I've got a size 6 short shank hook. That's a new pattern, very thick in the wire, a straight point that's very, very sharp, slightly in-turned eye, and I've tied that on using a knotless knot, but I've done it KD style. So gone through the eye of the hook, couple of turns round, pulled the hair back out the way, and then carried on turning down the hook, back through the eye, always towards the point, very, very important. And then the hair's tied after that, and again I've got a large loop so that that bottom bait is not sliding towards the hook and getting in the way. And again, I've probably got 10 to 12 inches of hybrid soft, a couple of the sinker weights on it. It's tied on at the end there with a grinner knot, just to show you that there are a number of different ways you can tie this hybrid soft to keep the breaking strain up to 20 pounds. And again, just like the other one, if I lay that in my hand, it's basically going to sit like that. So the bottom bait is sitting on the bottom, the pop-up is just above it, flies up into the fish's mouth very, very easily, and because the bait's weightless in this situation, the hook's going to turn and catch hold very well. So this particular example will sink slower than the version I've just shown you on the other snowman. So very, very important with the KD rig that the hook bait is almost weightless. You want it just touching the bottom. So if you're going to feed boilies and scatter them absolutely everywhere, they're the hooking arrangements that I recommend. Pop-ups if it's very, very weedy, and then some form of snowman rig if there's not so much weed out there. Let's have a look at the lead systems to go with them.